Good morning, everyone. My name is Samantha Blake. I'm the program manager here at the Women Legislators Lobby. Just a few housekeeping things. If you have any questions throughout the panel, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A or the chat, which is on the right-hand side of your screen. I also want to give a shout out that we're having our lobby day next week. So if you haven't signed up for that already, we'll drop the link in the chat for you to sign up. We're already making meetings and doing prep calls. So if you're nervous or have questions, we will answer all of your questions. We'll be there for you every step of the way. So please sign up if you feel moved to do so. And now I'll move on to talking a bit about today's presentation. So thank you everyone for joining us today, taking time out of your busy schedules to learn about the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, which we'll be calling RECA moving forward, just for brevity's sake. I'll try to do my best to give a brief overview of the history, context of the program before I introduce our speakers and get the conversation rolling. So RECA is a valuable but limited federal program that begins to address the harm caused by nuclear weapons testing and uranium mining. Many people don't know that there were over 200 above-ground nuclear weapons tests between 1945 and 1962, 100 of which happened at the Nevada test site close to Las Vegas, which exposed people near the site and across the United States. RECA is a government apology and provides a one-time compensation to individuals with specific diseases caused by radiation exposure. This includes downwinders, folks on site during the test, including veterans, uranium miners, and workers. And chances are, if you are a representative in a Western state, you have constituents who were impacted and may not even know that they're eligible for compensation. However, the program is due to expire in less than a year in July 2022, which is now less than a year away. So the communities that were affected and have yet to receive compensation desperately need the program to be expanded and extended. The amount provided is not even enough to cover the average cost of most cancer care, which is depressing. So with that note, I'm going to introduce our speakers. First, we have Susan Gordon, who is the program coordinator at the Multicultural Alliance for a Safe Environment. She has more than 2 decades of grassroots organizing experience with impacted community groups around the nuclear weapons complex. So Susan, I'll hand it over to you to introduce yourself and talk a bit about how you got involved in this work.
Great, thank you so much. And I appreciate all of the legislators that are here today. I have long been an ally and supporter of WAND and WILL, and really appreciate the opportunity to speak this morning. So I actually started doing grassroots organizing on the Oregon coast many long years ago now. My daughter is turning 40 in a couple of weeks, and it was before she was born. So easy to recognize those dates anymore. And we worked to create a nuclear-free zone in Coos County on the Oregon coast. And that was sort of my first introduction to working on nuclear weapons issues. I went on to become involved in statewide organizing, helping to found an organization called Oregon Peaceworks. We were instrumental in working with Representative Mike Kopetsky in passing the nuclear test moratorium in 1993. And we also were very involved in direct actions at the Nevada test site, attempting to stop continued nuclear weapons explosions that had moved underground by that point in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. From that position, I moved into being the executive director of the Alliance for Nuclear Accountability for 17 years. And I hope some of you know about the Alliance for Nuclear Accountability, ANA. It's a national network that had 36 organizations as part of it. And we work to address issues around the nuclear weapons complex the production sites as well as the waste cleanup sites and dumps. I'm currently the coordinator for the Multicultural Alliance for a Safe Environment. We're a network of 5 groups located in New Mexico, and we work on uranium mining issues, and RICA is a main part of our work. We work to stop new uranium mines and address the toxic legacy. So thank you again.
So much, Susan. And now I'm going to introduce or have Tina Cordova of Tularosa, Basin, Downwinders introduce herself.
Good morning, everybody, and thanks to WAND for hosting this event and inviting me to participate. My name is Tina Cordova, and I'm a native New Mexican, 7 generations here that I know of. I was born and raised in Tularosa, New Mexico, which is in south central New Mexico, about 45 miles the way the crows fly from the Trinity test site where the first atomic bomb was tested in the United States. It's in south central New Mexico. The government has always controlled the messaging around the Trinity site and has always said that the area was remote and uninhabited, that no one lived here and no one was harmed. But I'm proof of the fact that people lived as close as 12 miles to the test site, and that within the first 50 miles of the test site, there were close to 15,000 men, women, and children living there. I'm a downwinder. I'm a cancer survivor. I have owned my own business for 31 years and learned about advocacy as a small business advocate on behalf of women-owned, minority-owned, and veteran-owned business. And I've been working on this issue for 16 years. I'm the 4th generation in my family since 1945 to have cancer. Both my great-grandfathers, who were alive at the time of the Trinity test, died from stomach cancer 10 years later, at a time when we had never heard those words ever spoken in our community. My 2 grandmothers both had cancer, although that's not what they died from. My father developed 3 different cancers that he didn't have risk factors for, except that he was a 4-year-old child living in a community 45 miles away from the Trinity test site at the time of the test. He developed cancer at the base of his tongue first and went through a horrendous treatment for that. And then he developed prostate cancer. And 8 years after the very first cancer that he had, he developed a second cancer on the front of his tongue, not associated to the first one. It wasn't metastatic. You know, he didn't drink, didn't use chewing tobacco, didn't smoke, didn't have viruses. And when I asked the doctors, how did this happen? They basically said, it doesn't, but here in New Mexico, we see a lot of this. I had thyroid cancer when I was 39 years old. My sister is undergoing treatment for cancer now. My family has not been spared, and we've been spending a great deal of our time over the last 16 years documenting all of this. We've received grants from the New Mexico Health Equity Partnership, the Santa Fe Community Foundation, the Kellogg Foundation, the University of California, Santa Barbara, to conduct our health surveying. And for example, as of recently, we were going door to door in a small community called Carrizozo, New Mexico, which is about 35 miles away, the crows fly from the test site, collecting health surveys, because we long ago decided that if the government's not going to do that kind of work, if they're not going to come back and look at what happened to communities, we're going to do that. And so we've been working very actively in support of making certain that the RICA amendments and expansion is passed, and have worked extensively on the language with downwinders from places like Idaho, Utah, Guam, and uranium miners from the Navajo Nation, Laguna and Acoma Pueblo, to see that the language goes far enough. I'm so grateful to be here today, and I hope that we can start a dialogue around how everybody who's present with us can assist us in making sure that this very important that these very important bills are passed in Congress this year before it sunsets. Thank you.
Thank you, Tina. First question today, and feel free, both of you or either of you, to answer the rest of this question. The RICA bill was first passed in 1990, and it was extended multiple times since then. Could you guys talk a little bit about how the RICA legislation came to be in 1990 and why does it need to be extended now?
So if you would like, I would be glad to talk about how RICA was established. Senator Udall, our former senator from New Mexico, told me the story firsthand. His father, who was the Secretary of the Interior, was from Utah. And when he retired and left Washington, D.C. and went back to Utah, he discovered that there were all these people sick and dying. And that included people who were downwinders and also uranium miners. And he started filing claims on their behalf in the court system. Senator Udall was a young attorney at the time and worked with his father on those claims. And they were winning in the court system at every level. But at every level, the court was making the decision that because the testing and the mining was done in the interest of national security, that the government couldn't be held accountable for damages. And Senator Udall and his father realized after making it all the way to the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals that they weren't going to get the result that they had hoped through the court system, and that it was going to take a political resolve to get this done. And so Secretary Udall went to Washington, D.C. He wanted to make sure the bill was bipartisan. He met with Senator Ted Kennedy and Senator Orrin Hatch, and they introduced the original RICA bill in 1990. I will say that when I asked Senator Udall why New Mexico was not included in 1990, he said that there was just no one looking out for the people of New Mexico at the time. And so that's how RICA was established in 1990. It has been amended a few times through the years, but it still, through those amendments, hasn't ever addressed the New Mexico downwinders or the post-71 uranium miners.
So I'd like to talk a little bit about the uranium miners. So the current RICA legislation provides compensation to a limited number of uranium workers. And it stops providing coverage for workers if you worked in the mines after 1971. And the reason for that is that all of the mining that occurred up to 1971, all of that uranium ore was purchased by the US government for their nuclear weapons programs. After 1971, the uranium ore became available for the commercial nuclear power industry. And they thought at the time that if workers were harmed, they would be able to be compensated under state worker compensation programs. But that, of course, has not happened. There was no additional safety measures that occurred for the uranium workers after 1971. The majority of uranium mining that occurred in the United States happened after 1971. The last major mills were shut down in the late 1980s. So, you know, there's a vast number of workers who are not eligible for this compensation. In addition, it's been very difficult for the workers to be able to collect because you have to be able to prove when you worked in the mines. They ask questions like, do you smoke? And for a lot of Navajos in particular, they don't actually smoke cigarettes, but they smoke pipes during sacred ceremonies. And so if they answered yes, they smoked because they smoked during a sacred ceremony, then that is a mark against them and work to prevent them from collecting compensation. The new legislation will expand the compensation to all of the uranium workers. It expands the number of downwind communities that will be compensated, including the Tularosa Basin communities. And it also sets the compensation level at $150,000 for all victims, basically. So it raises the compensation for the downwind community as well as the uranium workers. And we think that that is, you know, is a great move. Many of us feel it doesn't go far enough. It certainly doesn't address, communities that have been impacted. This is a compensation program for individuals in those areas.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Tina. My next question is for people who aren't familiar with RECA and they're maybe just hearing about it now, what does its extension and expansion mean for impacted communities and families?
So, Samantha, just as a point of clarification in regards to RECA, when it was first established, it obviously only addressed certain communities downwind of the Nevada test site. The part that is missing is that there were a lot of downwind, and they literally call out counties inside of RECA for downwind purposes, but there are a lot of counties and entire states that have been left out. For example, no part of Idaho is included, or Montana, which were both downwind states. New Mexico is not included, and we were not only downwind of Trinity, we were downwind of the Nevada test site. That's well documented because when they started doing the testing at Nevada, there were monitoring stations all over the western part of the United States, actually all over most of the United States, but the main part of the fallout went to the western parts of the United States. And so as they approached this, they never made the bill broad enough to take care of all of the people who were harmed. And so now the reason that the extension and the expansion is so necessary is because for 31 years, essentially, a great number of people have been left out. And for example, the people of New Mexico have been waiting for 76 years to be included. And all of the state of New Mexico would be made a downwind state as part of this expansion and as part of these amendments, and all of the state of Idaho, all the state of Arizona, Montana, Colorado, Utah. So right now it's very limited because they call out certain counties as being downwind. For us in New Mexico, the downwind compensation ends right at the Arizona-New Mexico border. I always say as if there exists a lead curtain there that has somehow offered us protection from the chronic radiation exposure we received from the Nevada test site through the summer of 1962. Again, very well documented. And so when you ask the question about why it's necessary, let me explain that in rural New Mexico, which most of New Mexico is very rural, we don't have access to health care. There are no healthcare facilities. So we normally don't get diagnosed until late into the disease process when prognosis is very reduced. We always have to travel to receive the care that we need because there are no healthcare facilities where we live. So we can't be diagnosed at home or treated at home. And this has had an enormous economic impact on families, on communities, etc. So expanding and amending RECA to, number one, offer us healthcare coverage, which is vitally important, would mean the difference between life and death for some people. And number two, the compensation, or it's called partial restitution. Let's make sure we get the language straight, because it's not compensation, it's restitution. It's trying to make us, it's trying to offer us some level of restorative justice. That partial restitution will go a long way in making sure that people live out whatever's left of their lives if they're very sick, in stark poverty or not. In New Mexico, 47% of the people access healthcare here using Medicaid. And we know, because of the health surveying that we've been doing for 16 years, that a large number of them are downwinders using the Medicaid system, the highest per capita in the country, using the Medicaid system to access healthcare because they can't work any longer and they've lost their healthcare coverage. So for us, expanding and amending this is a social justice issue, a restorative justice issue. The other thing too that's established through RECA are the RECEP clinics, the clinics where people can go annually for free to receive screening for cancer. It would mean also a better outcome for people. The prognosis would be better. Their likelihood of surviving would be better because they would be able to be screened every year annually. For example, with thyroid cancer, if you catch it early, it's very treatable and you can live through something like that. So for the downwind community, and I know for the uranium mining community also doing work inside those communities, that this would mean the difference between life and death and receiving the medical care that you absolutely need to save your life, and the difference between living in poverty or not.
So would you like to add anything? All right, next question. What can state legislators do in their own communities to make sure that impacted communities get justice, or even find out if members of their communities have been impacted by nuclear testing or uranium mining?
Well, one of the things that we have been doing in New Mexico is we have a fairly accessible legislative process, though it's limited. It's one of the last non-paid legislatures in the country, for those of you who are legislators. And they only meet 60 days every other year and 30 days in those other years. So it's quite a somewhat unusual system. But we've been passing memorials in both houses that send messages to our congressional delegation to support the RICA legislation. And I think that serves as an opportunity to educate other legislators in the state. You know, we go before the committees, we give presentations about what the RICA legislation is about. And, you know, that's a good way of trying to expand the education at the state level. There are also several city governments and mayors that have signed proclamations in support of the RICA legislation. All of those things serve as really good educational opportunities to let your constituents know that this is an issue that you care about, and that we all need to be involved. This is a national issue. So I wanted to share that though many of us were maybe not alive during the above ground nuclear weapons explosions, there was a study in the early 1990s looking at the fallout from the above ground nuclear weapons tests that occurred in the United States. And they did research looking at iodine-31, which is a radionuclide that you can track. So that study was completed, and then the results of that were kept hidden for 14 years. And we were able to force the release of that study in, I think it was 1997. And so you can go online for the Center for Disease Control and the National Cancer Institute and look up the iodine-131 study. You can actually fill in a form. They ask you questions: where you lived during the time, what kind of milk you drank, because the most common intake for the iodine-131 was through milk, because the fallout fell on the grass. The cows and the goats ate the grass, and then we drank the milk. If you were raised on a farm and you drank goat's milk, your exposures were much higher. For some reason, I guess goats process it quicker or something. But you can look at maps of every county in the United States, and it will give you an estimate of what your exposures were. So though RICA doesn't address all of that, I'm just trying to make the point that this is actually a national issue. And there are places like in New York, some counties that have extremely high exposure from fallout. And there's very interesting stories about Kodak, which is from New York. They were using corn husks to package their film. and they found out that their film was getting exposed because of the fallout that was on the corn and the corn husks that they were using to, as packaging before we had our plastic peanuts. So the US government was notifying Kodak so they wouldn't be purchasing this corn husk material immediately after an above ground explosion. So our government knew for a very long time and lied to our community, lied to the people of the United States, and are continuing to lie about how dangerous radioactive exposures are.
Thank you, Susan. Terrifying to think about, but we need to think about it. Tina, is there anything else you would like to add?
Well, I just think that if you're a legislator that represents any part of the western part of the United States, you may likely have, and if there have been active uranium mines in your state, you likely have people that have been affected by this. And so, you can start taking a look at where you legislate and whether there are uranium mines and whether your state is one of the states that is mentioned in the RECA amendments. And if it is, then you likely have people that have been affected by this. And I just want to say in response to the question about the economic impact, because I think we sometimes miss what that has meant in our communities. I recently testified before the House Judiciary Committee, and Representative Johnson from Georgia said something so profound. He said, and I say it all the time, and so when he said it, it rang very true for me. He said, these people have had no opportunity to pursue life, liberty, and happiness, and that is absolutely true. We all live with a very low level of stress and anxiety over when we're going to get sick because everyone around us has been sick. But he said something even further more profound. He said that we spend $500 billion every 10 years guarding our nuclear arsenal. And he said we've paid $2.5 billion over 31 years to these people. That's a pittance, and we should be ashamed of ourselves because we put looking after nuclear bombs ahead of people's health and well-being. And I agree with him 100%. This is a social justice issue. It's nothing more, nothing less. And I always say that as people view this and understand this history, if you don't become involved in supporting our efforts to get RECA amendment, if you remain complacent, then you're complicit in the injustice of it all. You become complicit in the idea that you can look away from something that has been so profoundly negative in our lives. And I just have to say that, Anne mentioned, I saw it in the chat about veterans. Everybody needs to be taken care of that's been harmed. The 9/11 first responders and victims absolutely deserve the restitution and the healthcare coverage they've received. They've paid $11 billion over less than 20 years to them. We're just asking for, the same thing that other people receive, not one dime more, not one dime less. And so I hope that people understand how important this is for communities. We can no longer look away from the harm that's been done to people in the pursuit of nuclear weapons. American citizens, by the way, I always say we pledge allegiance to our flag just like everyone else. We pay taxes. New Mexico has done its share. We actually had more people enlist in World War II and die in World War II per capita of any other state in the country. And we have bore the brunt of this nuclear weapons testing industry. We actually have the cradle to grave process taking place here, where they open up the earth and remove the uranium. They develop and test nuclear weapons here, and then they bury the waste here. And so, it's time to reflect on that and make people whole again.
Thank you, Tina. We've got 10 minutes left. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to add them to the chat or the Q&A. But next question is, there's a common saying in advocacy, I think it's from the disability movement, nothing about us without us, meaning that no policy should be decided without the direct participation of members of the group affected by the policy. How should those interested in advocating for this issue start their advocacy in a meaningful and respectful way?
Well, if you have a member in your congressional delegation that is part of the Judiciary Committee on either the House or the Senate, you can join us immediately and ask them to be a co-sponsor. I just got a text message that we have 7 new co-sponsors on the House bill this morning. We're in the midst of a big push to get more and more sponsors. I think the reference to the 9/11 people who were finally compensated and only their compensation was about to expire, and it was an impassioned speech by Jon Stewart on the floor of the Senate that finally got that bill extended. We would really not like to have to go down to the last minute on July 11th, 2022. We really want this to happen now. So if you can, support us, let me give you the bill numbers. The Senate bill is 2798. Let me say that again. 2798 is the Senate bill, and the House bill is HB 5338. 5338. So sending messages into your members that are specifically part of the Judiciary Committee would be really important, but also getting your members to sign on and co-sponsor. That is the most important step that we can take right now.
Great, thanks, Susan. And I just want to also highlight that we have a letter that women state legislators have been signing on to, and we'll be sharing that around as well if anyone would like to take that first step in signing that letter. We also have talking points for Lobby Day to help with having these conversations. Tina, is there anything you'd like to add?
Well, I think that, we do need to focus on, as Susan has said, the members of the Senate and House Judiciary Committee. There's some of those members that are much more important than others. Obviously, Senator Durbin, if anybody's from Illinois, Senator Grassley, if anyone's from Iowa. We also need to focus on all of the members of the Senate Judiciary Committee, because we're going to need every vote in that committee to get us onto the floor of the Senate. So there are some key senators there that we have been focusing on. Senator Lee from Utah, Senator Sass from Nebraska, Senator Cornyn from Texas. So if anybody has, the desire to focus on those members of the Senate Judiciary, it would be very helpful to us. We have a 50-50 judiciary. So we need some support on the Republican side, absolutely. In the House, it's not as precarious because the House committee is it's got more Democratic members than Republican members, and more support in the House. But the chairman of that committee is Chairman Nadler from New York, and the ranking member is Jim Jordan. So I would just encourage everybody to do outreach in their particular states to their members of Congress, ask them to be co-sponsors. These bills have bipartisan support. We have both Republicans and Democrats in both the House and Senate supporting these bills. But I will tell you that there has been some expression of reluctance on the part of some. Recently, our state representative, Representative Ledger Fernandez from northern New Mexico, who's the primary sponsor on the House side, tried to add the amendments to the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, and that was shot down. But she did have an opportunity to at least ask for an apology to be added to the NDAA. And there was a Representative McClintock from California, who got up and spoke passionately about how he would never apologize to anyone for what was done, because it ended World War II and it was necessary. And so it's, it's sad that we can't look through this through a different lens these days, 70 some years later. That is not the lens that we should be looking at this through. The other thing I think we all need to be prepared for is that we oftentimes have people say to us, how are we going to pay for this? And we can no longer allow people to use that as the excuse for not passing these bills. When there's political will, they always find the money. And so we just need to express to them that they need to develop the political will to do the right thing and go in search of the money to make sure that these things happen. And so I think that would be exactly how I would address the question.
Tina and Susan. And one last question to end on a hopeful note. Once, in looking forward to a future where RECA is extended and expanded in 2022, what is the next steps in righting the wrongs of nuclear weapons production and harm?
Well, as somebody who's worked on the nuclear weapons side of these issues for a really long time, we need to get over the sort of worship of nuclear weapons. There is an effort currently to revitalize and rebuild the nuclear weapons complex, to go back into producing plutonium pits so that we can have new design nuclear weapons. You may know that there is now an international treaty that has declared that possessing nuclear weapons is illegal. The United States, of course, has not signed on to that treaty. So there's really a lot of work around nuclear weapons policy that has, yet to occur. There's, an effort to take our weapons off of high level alert from the Beyond or Back from the Brink campaign. So there's a lot to do in that way. There's also, for instance, under the previous administration, and its sort of U.S.-centric approach to policy, an effort to now create what's called a uranium reserve. They're trying to make strategic reserves of different kinds of metals that would be produced here in the United States. There is a glut of uranium in the world. A lot of uranium is being produced out of Australia, out of the Far East in Mongolia and Russia, in Canada. The US has only a couple of operating uranium mines at this point. So the idea of creating a US uranium mine or US uranium reserve is that we would then be subsidizing companies to restart the uranium industry in this country. And that's just crazy. We don't need this material. We have not even begun to clean up the mess. There are over 550 abandoned uranium mine sites just on Navajo Nation, 15,000 in the Western states. Those are the abandoned ones, which means that we don't know who the responsible party is. But there are more than that, because there are some where we're able to actually force owners to be involved in the cleanup. So I think there's lots still to do, making sure RECA compensation gets to the downwind community and the uranium miners. It's not an easy process to apply and get approved for this compensation. There's plenty of work still to do.
Thank you, Susan. And Tina, any thoughts on future after RECA is extended, expanded in 2022? What's next?
Well, honestly, that is the best first step in righting the wrongs that have taken place in the past, is to get RECA extended, amended, and get the help to the people that desperately need it. We try to always keep the issues of nuclear weapons production and our work on RECA separate, because we think that those are two very distinctly different issues. And so for the purpose of speaking about this, for me, the most important part is extending and amending and expanding RECA and focusing on that. And then for another day, we will start taking a look at our our efforts to address nuclear weapons production and the harm that's been done. I will say that we all need to remember that we just exited an administration that had, started the discussions around testing nuclear weapons again. And we all need to be very aware of that, because there are no winners in that equation. There are just losers. And I always say, if you don't understand what it means to start retesting nuclear weapons, then please call us up so we can tell you what life is like afterwards for you if they do this near where you live. So we need to always stand strong in the idea that we need to put the well-being, the health and well-being of our people ahead of these processes. And we need to focus absolutely on that. And then for me, the discussion again around nuclear weapons production and the harm that's been done is for a conversation after RECA has been amended and extended and expanded.
Thank you so much, Tina and Susan, for joining us today for this important conversation about RECA, radiation exposure, and what legislators and activists can do to start to get that restitution that frontline communities, uranium miners, and workers deserve. Next in our programming is our breakout sessions. So we have 2 today. We have an on-camera training, and then we also have a policy working group on healthcare policy with Planned Parenthood. So if you're interested in learning about how to craft policy in your state, or if you're interested in learning some new on-camera skills, we have those starting in about 5 minutes. But thank you, Susan, and thank you, Tina, again, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Samantha. Thank you. And thanks to everybody who participated.